NBA fans are fickle. While we all love to highlight the glamorous lifestyle of the multi-million-dollar, able-bodied stars that populate the league, the ability to change the financial trajectory of your entire bloodline inherently comes with the trade-off of exposing your craft to the eyes of millions, to be ridiculed, critiqued, and memed for all to see. But in the same breath, NBA fans are fiercely loyal, willing to go to equally unimaginable lengths to defend their favorite players and sing their praises to the same communities that so readily tear them down. Through the course of a player's career, it's not unnatural to see the tides of public perception wax and wane. In the NBA, like most sports, is a "what have you done for me lately" game, and fans tend to have short-term memory depending on how well or how poorly someone performs in a key moment. But there are a few players in the league who have managed to transcend the normal boundaries of fan hatred, transforming into something larger for all to laugh at, becoming not just a meme, but a symbol of everything wrong with the game today. And for the last 4 years, Kyle Kuzma has undeniably acted as the symbol of everything wrong with the modern NBA. But if you followed his career even slightly, you'd understand that the hate train wasn't always this large. And at one point, he wasn't just viewed as a promising prospect to watch, but a guy with future all-star potential. How does someone go from an underrated young talent to a symbol of the worst parts of the NBA? Obsessed with aesthetics, highlights, and everything the purest of fans attribute to the death of the game today? These are all questions worthy of a deeper dive. So in today's video, we're going to look at the career of Kyle Kuzma, the constant missteps that eroded his public perception, and discover what happens when main character syndrome goes wrong. In order to understand his shortcomings as a player, we have to briefly review who he was as a prospect entering the league and what most imagined his pathway to success to be as a pro. Because a quick look at his scouting report makes it clear that the core reason for his career decline is a classic case of great expectations leading to even greater disappointment. To explain, as a member of the loaded 2017 draft class, while the top of the draft board was relatively set in stone with Lonzo Ball, Markelle Fultz, and Jason Tatum all being the premier talents, the mid to late first round was a toss-up between prospects, and Kuzma found himself as one of the most intriguing pieces to come out of such a deep talent pool. Despite him being a slightly older prospect at 22 years old in his junior season at Utah, scouts were enamored with his potential upside as a 3-and-D player who could be the perfect complementary utility forward in the modern league. With his 6'10 frame and 7-foot wingspan, along with his flashes of shooting potential, all conjuring up draft day comparisons of the Morris twins and Jeff Green. In fact, in their scouting report on Kuzma, The Ringer made it a point to emphasize just how much his success in the league depended on his role, writing, quote, "Kuzma is a smart complementary player who cuts off ball, fills space, rebounds, and keeps the ball moving. He plays hard, has long arms, and shows flashes, and if he improves his fundamentals, he could be a multi-positional defender." All of these points on his potential as a rebounding defender who could impact winning came along with notable shortcomings as a shot creator. And after describing him as a, quote, "non-factor shooting off the dribble," they ended their report on Kuzma by saying, "He telegraphs his passes and makes poor decisions driving into traffic, though he won't be asked to carry such a heavy load in the NBA." This initial perception of Kuzma as a player will come to be the fundamental conflict that defines his lack of respect in the eyes of NBA fans. And while he was expected to be, and even showed flashes in one, as a rebounding defensive wing, the pursuit of stardom and glamorous stats would come to ruin him in the eyes of the broader NBA world. But as we know, Kuz's upside as a 3-and-D forward would lead to him being drafted 27th to the Nets before having his rights traded to the Lakers, joining a situation which is deserving of its own video, but in his case was markedly different. See, joining a franchise as storied as the Lakers undeniably comes with raised expectations, and with a fan base so accustomed to greatness, there will always be some level of pressure. But in Kuz's case, LA was fresh off an 11th seeded finish in the West, one full season removed from the Kobe era, with the presumed next Lakers great being Kuzma's fellow draftee Lonzo Ball, leading to a season with vastly lower expectations than there typically be for LA, and simultaneously setting Kuzma up for a major rookie season. With all eyes in LA turned towards Ball, it was Kuzma whose potential enamored Lakers fans this season. with his averages of 16.1 points and 6.3 rebounds on 45% from the field and 36.6% from three on 5.6 attempts a game, not just being good enough for him to finish 4th in Rookie of the Year voting, but positioning him as arguably the best young piece the Lakers had managed to acquire. Kuz's value this season, interestingly, didn't stem from his flashes as a rebounder, where he managed to finish in the 65th and 63rd percentile of wings in the league in offensive and defensive rebounding percentage respectively, nor was it the flashes of defensive potential he showed in bursts, but it was his shockingly developed offense and shot-making ability. Kuzma would find himself as arguably the most developed shot maker in LA, leading the team in catch-and-shoot points per game at 5.6, being 4th on the team in catch-and-shoot field goal percentage at 37.7%, all while getting to experiment as a driver and pull-up shooter, where his numbers weren't great, but were far more advanced than his 3-and-D draft profile would have suggested. So at season's end, despite dealing with a foot injury and LA not having a clear path back to contention, Kuz looked to be one of the few bright spots the franchise had to look forward to. But things all changed on July 1st, 2018, when LeBron James announced his decision to join the Lakers. To reiterate my earlier point, there will always rightfully be expectations of greatness when you play for LA, but the lackluster roster construction in the post-Kobe era had mostly tempered these expectations. However, the arrival of LeBron James launches any team into conversations of contention, regardless of how realistic they may be. And what was initially set up to be a promising season of development for Kuzma and the young Lakers had suddenly transformed into a tryout period to see who would still be around when the Lakers constructed a roster to contend. And in his season-long tryout, as LA again floundered to a 10th-seeded finish, Kuz cemented his place as a viable wing option on the soon-to-be championship team, with his averages of 18.7 points and 5.5 rebounds not only being a big improvement on his last season, but serving as a marker of potential championship-level utility. Through this campaign, while his three-point shooting in general would regress from his rookie season, there was a legitimate chemistry between Kuzma and LeBron, with Kuz being the most assisted player on the Lakers by LeBron, with 120 assists coming from the King. 33 more assists than his next most assisted player, JaVale McGee. And these assists came in a variety of actions that LeBron-led teams love to employ, leading to a diverse mix of above-the-break threes, rim finishes, or even short mid-range jumpers, where Kuz finished in the 71st percentile of all bigs in the league, connecting on 44% of his 217 total attempts from this area this year. These flashes of timely off-ball cutting, improved perimeter defense from last season, and floor spacing potential with the ability to put the ball on the floor to attack a closeout and detonate at the rim all came together to make Kyle Kuzma a seemingly indispensable part of the Lakers' future. And all of this goodwill became extremely important at season's end, as the Lakers would go all in on their championship hopes on July 6th, shipping out Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, and 3 first-round picks, the entirety of their young core and future, for Anthony Davis. And now, entering the 2019-20 season with championship or bust expectations, Kuzma found himself as the last man standing from the young core, handpicked by Lakers brass and LeBron with a clear role to fill if the team wanted any chance at winning. And it was his extreme struggles with these increased expectations that would begin the deterioration of Kuzma's public perception in the eyes of fans. Davis's arrival naturally decreased Kuz's role in the offense, with his averages of 12.8 points and 4.5 rebounds, all being regressions from his sophomore season. But now, the focus wasn't so much on his scoring as it was on his efficiency, where Kuz had notably struggled in the past and continued to not be great through this season, only shooting 43.6% from the field and 31.6% from three on 4.5 attempts a game. But these numbers don't begin to capture how inefficient Kuzma was this season, as his total three-point shooting percentage, which raises to 33% when you take out all of his heave attempts, still only managed to place him in the 34th percentile of all forwards in the league. And if you look at strictly non-corner trays, this number drops drastically to 26% from the field, placing him all the way down in the 16th percentile of all forwards. And though at a glance, his 74% shooting at the rim and 52% shooting on corner threes came together to place him in the 93rd and 96th percentile of these shots respectively, and seemingly provided a silver lining to such a lackluster shooting year, even these numbers become pedestrian when you realize Kuz posted his lowest shot frequency from these two areas, only taking 10% of his shots from the corners and 28% of his shots at the rim, meaning the only reason he managed to be even relatively efficient was because he hadn't taken enough shots for his true splits to shine through. This nightmare of a season was the first nail in the coffin of Kuzma's perception as a player, and as LA marched towards the playoffs, there were legitimate questions being raised about what had gone so wrong for a guy who looked to be the perfect complementary piece for a LeBron and AD-led team. However, the NBA's 4-month hiatus due to COVID gave Kuzma the chance for a much-needed reset. And upon his return to the court, he looked to have turned a corner to become the two-way 3-and-D forward the Lakers needed. Over his first 7 games back from the break in the bubble, Kuz would boost his averages to 15.4 points and 4.4 rebounds on a much improved 46.3% from the field and 44.4% from 3 on 5.1 attempts a game, looking like everything he'd need to be if LA was going to fulfill their championship hopes. And while over their playoff run, his shooting efficiency would eventually regress back to what it had been during the regular season, his increased focus on the defensive end allowed him to at least somewhat make up for his shooting woes. As over their championship run, he'd lean into his defensive versatility and attempt to guard 1 through 5. Finishing their playoff run is one of only 4 Lakers who posted a negative defended field goal percentage, with opponents shooting 0.4 percentage points worse when defended by Kuzma. And as Christian Rivas of SB Nation's Silver Screen and Roll points out, in their first round series against the Blazers, Kuzma was one of the Lakers' premier defenders, as he posted the second lowest defensive rating on the team at a 94.2, with the Lakers' defensive rating as a whole dropping by an unreal 16.4 points with him on the floor. But ultimately, while the Lakers would capture their first title of the LeBron era and Kuzma would be a key part of their championship rotation, legitimate questions were starting to be raised about if he'd reached his ceiling as a part of the Lakers. Kuzma's struggles adapting to a role on a contender can serve as the first act of his career and, in many ways, the perfect example of what can happen when inflated expectations and a suddenly wide-open championship window come together to put a spotlight on a guy whose developmental timeline didn't match up with his team's window for contention. The flashes that he'd shown through his stellar rookie season on a young Lakers squad with a wealth of talent positioned Kuzma as a favorite for a team in desperate search of a return to glory. And the sudden arrival of LeBron James and Anthony Davis took him from a promising young prospect to a guy who had a legacy of championship hopes rested upon his shoulders. And when he was unable to deliver, all of the love and adoration he received quickly devolved into blind hatred. And in the 2020-21 season, Kuzma's poor play and the Lakers' disastrous attempt at defending their title ended his time in LA on an extremely bitter note. Over the 65 games that he'd appear in, he'd averaged 12.9 points and 6.1 rebounds on a slightly better 44.3% from the field and 36.1% from 3 on 5.6 attempts a game. Stats which, coming off of the abysmal year he had previously, fully shifted his perception from a developing 3-and-D wing to a guy who'd maxed out in his second season in the NBA. But the ironic part about this season is that Kuzma actually showed more promise on the defensive end than he'd ever shown before, as the Lakers managed to climb to first in the league in defensive rating at a 106.8, and opponents scored 1.8 points less per 100 possessions with Kuzma on the floor, which placed him in the 67th percentile amongst all players. And turning back to SB Nation's Silver Screen and Roll, Kuz wasn't just a benefactor of a great supporting cast either, as according to them, Kuzma was in the 50th percentile of defensive matchup difficulty and the 95th percentile of defensive matchup versatility, with the team continuing to ask more of him as a defender and Kuz being able to deliver in a few ways. And what's more is a rebounder where Kuz had always shown some promise, he'd silently jumped to the top of the league, as his 5.7% offensive rebounding percentage and 15.7% defensive rebounding percentage placed him in the 89th and 78th percentile of all forwards this season respectively, and added a lot of value to a Lakers team that finished in the bottom half of the league in rebounding and desperately needed help on the glass. But unfortunately, no level of defensive efficiency and rebounding prowess could make up for just how harmful he was to LA on offense, as the Lakers' effective field goal percentage dropped 3.3 points with Kuz on the floor, placing him in the 15th percentile of all players. And they scored a whopping 7.5 points less per 100 possessions with him on the floor, placing him down in the 12th percentile of all players, the worst mark of his entire career. And as the Lakers had their hopes at a repeat snuffed out in 6 games against the Phoenix Suns in the first round, Kuz's averages of 6.3 points and 3.8 rebounds on 29.2% from the field and 2 for 20 shooting from 3 slammed the door shut on any possibility of him staying in LA past this season. So it came as no surprise on July 29th when Kuzma was shipped to the Wizards in a blockbuster draft day trade that sent Russell Westbrook to LA and gave Kuzma a chance at a bigger role, with expectations being drastically lowered. However, his arrival in Washington gave us some insight on his frustration with the Lakers in the small role that he'd been drafted to fill. And during media day, he gave some pretty revealing comments about who he felt he was meant to be in the league, telling reporters, quote, "For me, wanting to get traded and be in a type of situation where I can really spread my wings and develop a certain type of trajectory that I was on prior." These comments about returning to his previous trajectory could only be interpreted as him referring to the days prior to the arrival of AD, where he had more freedom and responsibility in the offense, and thus, despite his documented efficiency struggles, Kuz felt that more shots and more opportunity would return him to glory. And in his first season in Washington, on a few levels, it looked like he may have had a point. At a glance, he'd have a return to form scoring-wise, with his averages of 17.1 points and 8.5 rebounds on 45.2% from the field and 34.1% from 3 on 5.7 attempts a game, all being numbers he hadn't come close to since his second season as LeBron's running mate. His improved statistical output was in large part due to an increased involvement in the team's attack, with his 24% usage rate placing him in the 92nd percentile of all bigs, and giving him the chance to experiment as a pick-and-roll ball handler, driver, and even spot-up shooter with far more opportunities than he'd ever had before. And as a defensive rebounder, Kuzma would be the most impactful he'd ever been in his career, with his 21.2% defensive rebounding percentage being the highest mark of his career and good to place him in the 74th percentile of all bigs. Through the year, he'd managed some impressive feats to hype Wizards fans into viewing him as a potential MIP candidate, as he averaged 20.6 points and 9.1 rebounds on 47.1% from the field and 34.9% from 3 over his final 37 games of the year. So ultimately, despite the quite obvious stagnation that had occurred in his efficiency as a scorer, Kuzma's first season in Washington was widely regarded as a success. And with Washington having traded for Kristaps Porzingis at the deadline and Bradley Beal looking to have a fully healthy year, the 2022-23 season initially looked to be the one that gave Kuzma a second chance at impacting winning basketball. But as the year progressed and expectations lowered, fans got a chance to see just how much of a mixed bag Kuzma's production could truly be. Through the 64 games that he'd appear in, he'd average 21.2 points and 7.2 rebounds on 44.8% from the field and 33.3% from 3 on 7.5 attempts a game. Numbers that, again, on face value seem quite impressive, but require a few key bits of added context. The constant injuries to Beal and others that plagued this lineup allowed Kuz to operate on the perimeter and as a ball handler in an even more pronounced role than he had prior, notching a 27.4% usage rate this season, which placed him in the 92nd percentile, this time of all forwards. A notable positional shift from last season that was brought about by the presence of Kristaps Porzingis and Daniel Gafford in the lineup. And as a result of him being positioned more on the perimeter and as a play finisher in Beal's absence, he was forced to operate out of a wider variety of actions this year. And a closer look at his bread and butter play calls revealed that he was even less efficient than we previously thought. For starters, spot-ups were still a big part of Kuz's shot chart, where he had a 27.2% spot-up frequency, but his 0.98 points per possession and 37.4% score frequency all came together to only place him in the 41st percentile of all players in the league this year. And the added opportunities as a pick-and-roll ball handler that Porzingis and Gafford brought only exposed how underdeveloped this part of Kuzma's game had been. as he handled the ball in the pick and roll with an 18.2% frequency, yet a 0.83 points per 100 possessions placed him all the way down in the 39th percentile of all pick and roll ball handlers. But at the same time as he was continuing his efficiency struggles on offense, defensively he had an unexpectedly strong season. As while the Wizards only ranked 21st in the league in defensive rating, defenders shot 3.3 percentage points worse when defended by Kuzma, the second best mark on the team only behind Kristaps Porzingis. And at a larger scale, opposing teams scored 5.3 points less per 100 possessions and had a 2.9% lower effective field goal percentage with Kuz on the floor, numbers that placed him in the 89th and 90th percentile respectively and looked to be the defensive awakening fans had been waiting for since the day he was drafted. Kuzma's 2022-23 season underscores just how widely his positive and negative impact could be on a team at once, with his stagnating efficiency and offensive output being balanced by arguably the strongest defensive showing he'd had in his entire career. But the constant injuries to Beal and the rest of the team, along with the sobering reality that even at full health, Washington was nowhere close to contention, caused them to change courses in the 2023 offseason, offering Kuzma a 4-year deal as they shipped off Beal and Porzingis to bring in Jordan Poole and fully commit to the rebuild. And for Kuzma and Washington, the 2023-24 season really needs no further explanation, as Washington floundered to a 15-67 record, with Kuzma and Poole becoming the mascots for the highlight-fueled, box-score-driven mediocrity that's poisoned modern basketball in the eyes of purists. And even as the 2024-25 season arrived and Kuzma was gifted another chance to play meaningful basketball via a trade to the Bucks, his continued efficiency struggles, paired with a defensive regression and a reputation that precedes him, has culminated in one of the league's most confusing players being boiled down to nothing more than a punchline for NBA Twitter. But as we've seen throughout this video and throughout his career, the deterioration of Kyle Kuzma's perception to fans has always been a product of him time and time again failing to fulfill his end of the bargain as a complimentary piece to superstars. From the time he was drafted, he was imagined in the mold of a lunch pail guy who comes to the game and works hard to rebound, play defense, and impact the game in ways that the box score may not reflect, but fans and teammates would appreciate. And yet, the chase for stardom, big-time stats, and an even bigger-time personality and fashion sense has eroded any and all goodwill he could possibly have with fans. And despite any stretches of good play or promising offensive and defensive production outside of his rookie year, fans that have become accustomed to his patterns of inconsistent play when it matters most have rightfully erred on the side of caution with any good stretch he has. Because cruel as it may seem, everyone knows that the good times with Kuz never seem to last. So now, as we find ourselves awaiting the start of the 25-26 NBA season and Milwaukee looks to make a push back into contention, all eyes are again going to be on Kyle Kuzma. Because when the lights are at their brightest, we'll find out if Kyle Kuzma is the NBA's biggest joke or the league's newest championship cornerstone. But with all that being said, that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully I can catch you in the next one.